Hey guys, Jerry. Welcome to Jerry Inspired. So this next guest is Nico Julia, who goes to Georgetown for their MSFS program. Now, at the beginning of my interview, my audio got messed up. That's why I'm re-recording this. But this first question I asked him was, did he always know that he wanted to do international relations? So enjoy this interview.
The yes is that since I was a little kid, as far as I can remember, I've always been obsessed with maps, which naturally trains you into international relations, global politics, anything that has to do with the world I was interested in. So I'd collect these little cards as a kid that had maps on them and big like monuments from around the world, and I'd look at them and I'd look at maps, and the first interactions that I had with maps was looking at the map and imagining how someone lived in a certain part of the world, right? And so you had to learn also about geography to be able to imagine those things, what the climate is like, what the politics are like, those kinds of things. And so eventually that entrains an interest in international relations, because you ask yourself, why do certain people live this way? Why do I live this way? And why is there conflict in that? So that's the yes factor, right? So since I was a little kid, I've always been interested in international relations before I even called it international relations and before I even knew it was called international relations. The no factor is that I'm a public school purist, actually. I love public institutions. I'm a big fan of public institutions. And I'm not as much of a big fan of private schools and private institutions. I think that privatized institutions, you're putting up a paywall unnecessarily a lot of times. And, you know, I grew up in France. And so over there, it's public institutions, it's socialized institutions. So in that regards, when I was in high school, I was a little more gung-ho about it, but I was not interested in going to Georgetown because it was a private religious university. So, it's undeniably an amazing school, a great school for what I want to do. So it would be a bad opportunity to pass up. So that's why I'm now going, and I've changed my mind a little bit on those kinds of things. But overall, yeah, those were the factors that pushed me towards and pulled me away from Georgetown.
It's so fascinating too, because when I was a kid, one of the biggest hobbies I had was looking at atlases and looking at maps. So it's crazy. I found a spirit animal. Like, I would spend hours, because my family, when we first came to America, we wanted to travel everywhere in America because my dad had this vision that we'd return to China one day, which we did. And so my dad bought these like thick atlases, and we're like, oh, we got to see like every American state. So I would just like look at every American state, look at all the states in Canada, well, provinces technically. And I was just like, look at the rivers, look at the highways. So yeah, I know exactly that fascination with maps, bro.
Yeah. It's really, the way that I look at maps is like, with just looking at a map, you can get a bunch of different stories out of it, right? And especially when you look at vintage maps or like really old antique maps, it's more to the interpretation of the cartographer, right? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm receiving a call.
Oh, it's all good.
So it's more the when an antique cartographer is making a map, they're showing you what they're seeing. They're showing you their interpretation of the world, right? And so that's also an interesting vision to have. So, I have a collection of, I think, 1,200 maps or so.
Wow.
So I have a lot of maps. I collect, I trade. And yeah, I look for unique maps. I look for a lot of propaganda maps, because those are also about like, what kind of visions people have of the world. I was just in Guyana, actually, in South America. And so I went to, out of interest, I went to the part of Guyana that is claimed by Venezuela. In the western part of the country. So, that's a dotted line that I've seen on maps for so many years, because since Simón Bolívar and the liberation of Venezuela, they have been claiming that part of Guyana. So it was interesting. It's always great to study something for so long and then go boots on the ground and see it.
Yeah. Wow. It's so funny as you're talking about maps, right? I wanted to show you. Have you seen the Chinese map, like where China's in the center?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you've
I
seen
collect
that.
propaganda maps,
Yeah.
actually. I have
Yeah.
mounts
So let
on
me
maps.
just share my screen so viewers can see what Nico and I have seen. But this is always fascinating to me. Like, again, you have to type world, right? Because if you type China, but without world, you won't see this. But like, see, in this one, China's in the center. So it's really cool. I love sharing people this, because like in America, of course, we see America in the center, but in the Chinese map, China's in the center. It's really fun.
Yeah. No, it's super cool. And you add on top of that the graphics and stuff on the side. and then the connections that China has. There's this famous Communist Party map that has China in the center as the center of the world with a big picture of Mao on it, and then all the connections that China has. And it shows China as the world power, right? Which, might be true, might not be true. Either way, they're undisputably saying we're the world power, we have the connections, and that's the way that they view themselves, right? So if you understand that that's how they view themselves, you can understand if you're negotiating better, if you're having conversation better, these kinds of things. So maps are great for understanding people as well.
Yeah. One story I always tell people. So one of my biggest challenges when I was at ByteDance was to try to explain to my Chinese coworkers, hey, I get it that you guys have like 1.5 billion people in China, but that's still not the majority of the world. As much as you think that you have all the population, the reason I'm saying that is sometimes my coworkers just couldn't understand, okay, like a Hispanic American, even an Asian American like me, a Black American would think differently. They're like, yeah, but like people in China seem to think this way. How could people think different? And so that was one of my biggest, and be like, no, like, people think differently. So these are things you have to understand. And this is something I think you appreciated very early in life through looking at maps and other experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And, when you study these things, when you go visit and when you talk to people on the ground, that's also an experience that's irreplaceable, right? So you can study all you want, but going in person is going to be really, really different. I went to China, I think, twice in the last 3 months. I love China, actually. It's one of my favorite countries. And I was, last time I was there, I was in Urumqi in Western China, which is obviously a very interesting part. Maybe we won't get into it, but it's an interesting part of China for sure, for a variety of reasons. And what is interesting about Chinese people in China is that they feel very insular culturally, right? Because they're surrounded by applications, media, culture that we do not have in the Western world at all, right? Like the entire ecosystem just on their phone is different. So the interactions that they have every single day is so different. It's like sometimes it feels like you're on a different planet. So that's why I tell people who visit China for the first time, or who are interested in visiting China, it has, as a foreigner, it has high barriers to entry to be able to enjoy the country, to be honest, right? Like you need to have WeChat Pay or Alipay, right? Like already someone who's going to be going to Italy once in their life and then going back to the United States might have trouble with that kind of thing already, right? It's a little bit more uncomfortable. So there are these barriers to entry to enjoy the country, but then once you're there, it's so different from anything you'd experience anywhere else. And the food is great. The people are nice, mostly in rural areas, I will say, but it's a great place to be. Beautiful.
So obviously you're very well traveled. Let's talk about sort of your journey before undergrad. What did you do / what were your interests? And you mentioned you sort of grew up in France a little bit. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I was actually born in California. And then at 10 weeks old, I took my first flight to France. So my mother, she's French, Croatian, and American.
Whoa.
And my dad is French and American. And so I was born into already, you're set up for failure there. You got 5 citizenships across 2 parents. You're gonna be in a lot of planes in your life. But yeah, so I, as a really young child before school and stuff, I'd mostly just spend my summers in France. And then we moved to France full time. I did my elementary school and stuff there, middle school. And then beginning of high school, my sister and I wanted to move back to the United States. She was a very high level swimmer, and it's kind of difficult to be, a top swimmer and go to high school in France. You have to both, you don't have the same like student athlete vibe as you do in the United States. So we moved to the US and we both wanted to go to college in the US. And so that's how it worked. Both my parents are extremely well traveled, speak a lot of languages. So as kids, we would always take interesting trips, and travel a lot. And that's probably the thing I'm most grateful for in my life, because it's the best education you can have is seeing the world and understanding how it operates.
Yeah, exactly. What did you study undergrad?
So I went to California Polytechnic in California. So it's an engineering ag school with some pretty good other programs as well. Some good business programs, some good, actually the poli-sci program is pretty good. And I triple majored there, 3 majors, 4 minors. And
3 majors, 4 minors. I want to emphasize that to people. Three
yeah.
majors, 4 minors. That's awesome. Let's keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, so I studied environmental geography, political science, and Spanish as my majors. So, you know, it wasn't like I was triple engineering. And then I did computer science, statistics, French, and Latin American studies as minors. So the goal of Polytechnic is really to have a really pluralistic view of topics. Like the motto is learn by doing. And learn by doing really means like, it doesn't just mean that every time you're in a class, you're applying what you're learning, but that's a really important part. But they also mean you're applying what you're learning as soon as you get there, right? You don't have to wait. You don't have like a 2-year waiting period where you have to declare your major. You declare your major before you get there, and then first class you have, you know, is a major class. And so they really immerse you. They connect you with industry. It's like, to me, it's the best school I could have gone to for undergrad. It was always my top option. So
Wow.
My favorite option.
And I know, especially around the time I met you, that you were doing stuff with NASA too, right?
Yeah. So I worked in a lab, a geoinformatics lab, and we did a variety of things. So I worked with the National Estuary Program for a while. I was a research fellow at the National Estuary Program, where I did machine learning algorithms to do automatic detection of eelgrass growth. And then in NASA, it was similar. You know, like pretty much everything I do is the same thing, but in different fonts, right? So at NASA, what we were doing was automatic detection of agroforestry in the Brazilian and Peruvian Amazon with machine learning algorithms. So, you know, it's similar, but different enough to where you have to tweak the algorithms, tweak the training data, and make sure that you know a lot about remote sensing so that you know what kind of data you input and don't input to avoid the noise. So yeah, pretty interesting projects that I had the opportunity to do as well.
Wow. And then on top of that, you also have some entrepreneurial stuff, right? And did these emerge naturally out of all the things you were doing?
Yeah, 100%. I actually never in my life was I interested really in being like in starting a business or being an entrepreneur by any means. It sort of came naturally because I saw, so I created 2 companies during my undergrad. The first one was an ed tech company, and that was something where I was actually serving as the secretary of clubs and orgs for my school in the student government. And there's this issue in large public universities where you have hundreds and hundreds of clubs, and you have one club fair a year, right? So you have this opportunity to walk through aisles of, you know, Berkeley has like 1,200 clubs. My school had about 500, so a little less. But even then, how do you expect to walk through 500 booths and find the club for you, right? Like that's pretty unrealistic. So we created this, two other students actually from the lab, from my geoinformatics lab, and we created this ed tech tool where you take a quick survey about yourself and you answer questions about yourself. And then it gives you, based on a cosine similarity algorithm, your top matches of what clubs would work well for you. So you basically get like scores on these tags, and then it matches you with the clubs that are best fit for you based on your answers. And then the second one emerged while I was also working on this NASA project. And I was talking to this scholar in Peru, actually. And she was, we were having a conversation about the data that we were using. So we were using something called JEDI data. And we were looking at this stack of bands, of multispectral bands. And I was looking at the data and I was like, you know, we could probably use this data to do disease detection. And she looks at me squarely in the face and she says, yes, but that's not the goal. And that was sort of a hilarious thing to say, because to me, that's kind of the epitome of what's wrong with academia sometimes, right? Like they spend so much time, I unfortunately am a part of that as well sometimes, but you know, you spend a lot of time developing something and developing this tool and trying to make it perfect. And the goal of developing that is to publish it, right? There's no user in the end goal. And I had a conversation recently with the lady who was my boss at NASA, and she was saying the reason that's the case, which is true, right? And I don't fault them for it, is that breaking that research into user interface is so much work that NASA is not willing to put in, right? Like, and that's fine. That's true. What they want to do is be top edge and make sure that they know what they're doing. And then if it happens that there is someone in industry that wants to pick this up, then they have the tech to back it up, right? But having that said to my face plainly, like that's not the goal, I was like, well, let's make it the goal, right? Because you have billions of people around the world that could benefit from this kind of thing. And they're not, just because of the fact that academics, are just in their little holes trying to do their own thing and publishing what they're doing instead of trying to make it really publicly accessible, right? Because it's in academic jargon, impossible to digest. So yeah, it's open to the public and everything, but do you think a smallholder farmer in Western Kenya is going to read a paper from NASA and then be like, oh, I'll use a multispectral data from Sentinel-2 to identify if I have diseases, right? So that was how the second one emerged sort of naturally as well.
Yeah, that is such a thing that I think as I'm going back to school, I have to balance too, because so much of my life was like, let's just do. But what I did is I think sometimes I didn't take the time to really think it through or, learn the theory and all that. So it's almost like I'm trying to balance myself from the other direction. Like I'm all like, implement. It's like, okay, maybe let's think about it a little more, read a little more, learn a little more. Yeah, I know exactly your frustration. And I would meet a lot of people when I lived in LA who had all these brilliant ideas. And I'm like, are you going to do anything? They're like, one, it's like either they thought their ideas wasn't brilliant enough, or two, even worse, they wanted to like give me the idea so I do it, or I help them do it. I'm like, can't you just do it yourself? So yeah, I know exactly that thought, and I think this is a conversation we're going to have a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually so this summer I was working with this guy in Kazakhstan, and he says to me like, "What's it like to be self-made and so young?" And I was like, "What a ridiculous question." I mean, the concept of self-made to me is not real, right? Like you're always going to be a product of everything that's around you, and there's a certain amount of, I mean, especially in my life, I was born in California, right? That's already huge amount of privilege, to two parents that were extremely educated and multinational. That combination of things alone is huge, right? But so you can't call yourself self-made, but what I do like is the word self-starter, right? Because there are a lot of people who are in the right position to do things, but they don't, right? And that, I think, is the difference between certain people, what you just described, right? You have the person who is in the position to do something, but won't because either they're too lazy, not confident, whatever it is. Usually it's really laziness, right? But then you have the person who's like, okay, I'm going to do it and I'm going to try it and I'm going to try my best, right? So that to me is a self-starter. So a self-starter is more important than being quote unquote self-made, which is to me not really a real concept. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that taking it that extra step is what makes a difference to everyone.
Yeah. And I'm going to continue on this topic because I think it's so important, especially in this day and age. Like I remember I had a friend and he wanted to learn how to make YouTube videos, and I gave him all my notes. Like my notes are available to anyone. If anyone wants to read everything I've learned from making YouTube videos all these years, I can share you my notes. But he read those notes and never did anything with it. And every single person that I've shared those notes with has never done anything with it. And I'm like, that's really interesting. One, thinking from a psychology perspective, maybe I should charge for those notes in the future. They dish out some money, they're going to want to justify it. But two, it's also like, you do understand, like, I'm giving you just free knowledge. And if this is something you really want, like, take advantage of it. And then I'm like, oh, so this is why there's a barrier to entry to making content. It's because, like, the knowledge is there. It just takes a little bit of hard work. And maybe some people don't want to put the hard work or are a little bit intimidated by the hard work. But I've shown, like, I'm not the most talented YouTuber, but I've built quite a few channels that got big. So it's like, yeah, long story short, this is a topic we'll continue grasping at because of AI. Like, AI's made everything theoretically easier. So anyone that wants to be a self-starter theoretically should be able to do it even better.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the thing that you mentioned about the money is interesting and something that I've had to deal with as well, because actually my professor, who was the head of the lab that I worked at, he also helped me develop this product called Open Farm, which was the one I was just talking about. And he also started this fire mapping thing. And both Open Farm and fire mapping is completely free for users, right? And it's open source, open access, whatever. But somehow he says, when you charge people for the fire mapping stuff, there's a better chance that people actually, are going to take it, are going to use it, and then you're going to increase your usership. It's like you're offering this free product. You're throwing something free at people and they don't want to take it. And he said he thinks that there's several reasons. The first reason is people trust something that's paid more, right? Like, oh, it's free, it must not be good. Oh, I'm paying for it, it must be good. And the second thing is exactly what you mentioned, right? Like you have a sunken cost now, so you better be using what you paid for, right? There's an incentive for you to continue using what you've bought and what you've invested into. So yeah, it's pretty funny and interesting. And as you and I, for example, are not good at market analysis because we're not users. We're not like an average user, right? Like I will go so far out of my way. Even when I was a kid, I would like jailbreak phones and stuff. I would go so far out of my way to not spend a penny on like a game or a subscription or something like that, right? And it's possible, but it's hard, right? Like, and then you have to ask yourself as an adult, is my 2 hours of jailbreaking this torrent and stuff worth $7.99? But as a kid, of course, it's worth it because you don't have money, right? But that's not the average user. Like, not a lot of people are willing to put in that kind of effort to not spend $7. So it's difficult for me to do a market analysis. It's difficult for you to do a market analysis because I'm like, well, yeah, of course I'd use a free open source product, right? But that's not necessarily the case, and it's something you got to keep in mind too when you're developing this kind of thing.
Totally. Let's jump into what you want to do when you're at Georgetown. Do you have any thoughts on that right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to do the Master of Science in Foreign Service. What I'm interested out of Georgetown is mostly I've done a lot of the technical side of things in the last 3 years during my undergrad. So I did a lot of programming and remote sensing and other kinds of geosciences. So right now I feel pretty good with my GIS skills, my geography skills, my environmental science skills, even right now with all the agronomy stuff. So I'm feeling good about that. What I'd like to develop more of is the soft science side of things. So, the diplomacy, how you approach a meeting, how you approach a negotiation, how you talk about things, how you approach really what I do is development essentially, right? So how do you approach development? How do you make something sensibly grow in a foreign place? And that's sort of what I'm interested in getting out of Georgetown. And also in passing, while I'll be in DC for 2 years, it'll be a good opportunity for me to network with some institutions in the United States that will be important for the development in the future of this product. So that's sort of what I'm looking out of. Low expectations, to be honest. Like, you got to keep your expectations low because I don't know what it's going to be like, but I'm excited. It'll be good.
Yeah, exactly. So, let's continue talking about the places you've been to, because I think for me, that's one of the coolest things. Like, for example, Nico just happened to get street interviewed when he was in Indonesia. And it was a great interview because I didn't even understand this, that certain cultures, they really care about their accolades to the point where, like, if they have multiple accolades, you have to mention all of that. Like, that's something I learned. And tell me about that experience.
Yeah, so I will say that's the most difficult part about approaching a new place when you're doing a business meeting, because everyone cares about different things. I'd say in the United States, we're pretty informal about the way that we approach business as a general rule, right? Like, I can call you Jerry, if we're having a business meeting, I can call you Jerry. But there are a lot of countries where that's not the case. And when I was growing up in France, similar thing, titles are important, but it's mostly a hierarchical thing in terms of age and placement. So it was something I was sort of used to, but there are some countries that take it to the extreme, right? So in the Middle East, there are a lot of His Excellency. So you have to say, right, the title, if it says HE and it says doctor or PhD and it says, engineer and stuff, like in the United States, you never say engineer, right? Like, you don't say, oh, this is engineer Jerry Liu. Like, what? Whereas over there in the Middle East, you have to address the guy. You say, Your Excellency, Doctor, Engineer, and then you say his name. And then if there's something to tag on the end, like MSCA or something like that, you say it. It's like, it's a little bit absurd, and I don't find it to be that necessary. I understand. I definitely understand like the respecting, right? Like I think it's important to respect someone when you enter a business meeting, but I think that there are better ways of doing it that don't seem so outdated, right? And something that's interesting about Indonesia is that they have a title that doesn't exist really anywhere else, which is Haji, right? So someone, a Muslim who does his pilgrimage to Hajj, comes back. Now they put Haji as their title.
Whoa.
Right. So it becomes a part of your list. In between doctor and engineer, you have Haji, right? So it's like,
Wow.
and that doesn't exist anywhere else. And my understanding, at least, is that that's not really allowed actually in Islam. But yeah, it's it's a interesting thing to have to navigate where every time you work with a new country is understanding the cultural norms with the business because they differ so much, right? And I'm sure you worked internationally with ByteDance, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. But it's you're really scared of misstepping, right? Because you can lose an opportunity easily.
Yeah. The thing I think about is, for example, in Chinese schools. I went to public school in China for 2 years when I was little. And in America, for example, you would just call the teacher Mr. something. So Mr. Julia, or, if the teacher's a doctor, he would call doctor. But like in China, teachers are called teacher. So like you'd be teacher Julia, like Julia Walsh, right? So like there's a specific designation for teacher. And of course, if you were a professor, 教授, right? So Julia 教授. So like there's more designations than just the Mr., Mrs., and doctor that we're used to in the West. So then I think about that. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, then I hear about Indonesia. It's like, okay, then let's like add more to that. Like the Haji part's really cool. And in fact, I would say if someone did make a Hajj, yeah, totally, like show people. But then you think about the Abrahamic faiths, like, is there something you really brag about? You know what I mean? Like, it's actually a deep philosophical / religious question you like mentioned, and it's worth exploring on the side in the future. Like, I want to look at scripture to see, like, okay, let's say I went to Israel one day to explore Gethsemane. Would I like tell people, yeah, oh my God, look at me, I like walked through Jesus's footsteps? You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, well, that was sort of my impression talking to Indonesian people, is like they're pretty split on that, right? Because Indonesia is farther from the Middle East than a lot of Muslim countries, and it's also poorer than a lot of Muslim countries, right? Well, not a lot, but it's poorer than the Gulf for sure. And so there is a smaller percentage of the population that will go to Mecca in Indonesia than there is in Qatar or in the UAE or in Kuwait, right? And so in a way, it is something to be proud of because it shows that you were able to make it. You have such a strong amount of faith that despite being from this place that was sort of, difficult to get out of to do your pilgrimage, you still managed to do it. And you did it with pure faith, right? So that's something to respect. But at the same time, most people who disagree with it, my understanding is that in Islam, that's not something that you should be doing or be allowed to do. And the fact that Indonesia is the only country that sort of brags about it, it's sort of telling, right? Because it's not a standard practice. So you got to ask yourself why that is.
Yeah. And adding to ethnography, adding to sort of the conversation I started with about, China and its population, Indonesia, surprisingly, most people don't know this, has the highest number of Muslims, right? So like people think, okay, it's Saudi Arabia or something. No, actually it's Indonesia. So then it's like, okay, well then where is the center of Islam? Or so these are actually really deep philosophical, political science questions that I pose to people. I don't have an answer. So this is a rhetorical question, but like these are things that people need to think about.
Yeah. And even within Indonesia, like the variance of Islam is huge, right? You have, in Sumatra, you have a region called Aceh in the north. And it's like one of the strictest places in the world for Islamic faith. I mean, like a man and woman who aren't married, like can't hold hands, and they get whipped in public if they do. It's like all these crazy things are happening out there. Like, so, that's something, if you're sort of unconscious of what you're entering, especially doing business, like you could easily offend people in Indonesia, right? Like someone comes to Bali, if they only have an idea of Bali, that's the only place in Indonesia that's like that, right? Like, do not go to the island of Java thinking that you're expecting another Bali, right? Like, you do not have anyways. But yeah, it's the cultural thing is difficult to navigate sometimes, right? Because you just don't know what to expect, and you aren't able to study up on what to expect until you get there on the ground.
Yeah.
Right? You can study all you want, and I get a lot of I'm afraid sometimes that when I arrive somewhere on the ground, I'll get jaded because it's somewhere I've like studied so extensively and I know so much about, but it's never the case, right? You always learn something new once you're on the ground. So it's always
one very interesting thing I always tell people, Nico, about cultural differences is personal space, right? I assume probably even being partially French, like the personal space in France is probably a little closer than what it is in America. And I've experienced this in 3 different ways. It's so funny, you know, because obviously I'm very Americanized, even though I can very easily, if you use the sociology term, I could code switch into being a Chinese person pretty easily. But one thing is, when I first really started like assimilating pretty well into the American Western culture, I started noticing a lot of the more recent Chinese immigrants would be in my face a lot. I'm like, oh yeah, that's just cultural. And then another thing that would happen is this happened with a European neighbor and an African neighbor, but they would put their hands in my face when they talked. And I would first try to move away from them, and then they follow. I'm like, in America, you can't put your hand in people's faces, okay? I don't know where you learned it, but you can't. Like, it was kind of mean how I said it, but I'm like, this means we're about to fight, okay? You can't put your hand in someone's face. I'm like, at first, I was like a little bit annoyed, but then a European did it to me and an African did it to me. I'm like, okay, I'm the weird one. Americans are weird about personal space. So like, I tell those stories. I'm like, things we take for granted, don't take for granted when you interact with other cultures.
Yeah, there's this National Geographic article that I read. So I collect National Geographic books too. So like have editions all the way back to like 1950. Anyways, that's irrelevant. But so I've read a lot of National Geographic articles, and there was one about queuing actually. So like being in line, right? And I was in Bangladesh like 3 weeks ago, and so I'd been to India before, and Bangladesh is like, if anyone's been to India, Bangladesh is like India on steroids, essentially. The amount of personal space that you have is like negative. You know, it's the most crowded country in the world. It's ridiculous. It's really crazy. And the concept of queuing is interesting because when you're queuing, there's sort of this social contract and acknowledgement of we're waiting in line. And if you're closer to me, that won't necessarily make you go faster. Okay. If you're too far from me, you might get cut. All right. So you can stand behind me, maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet. That's appropriate. No one will slip in. Right. But at the same time, you're not sticking yourself to me. Right. That feels like a pretty logical, sensical way to look at queuing. But no, I mean, you know, wheels on the ground, the plane arrives, wheels on the ground, people are getting up already. And the flight attendant's like shrieking, like, sit down, sir, please sit down. But, you know, it's one flight attendant and 200 Bangladeshi men standing up. So there's not much that you can do. You arrive at immigration, same thing. It's like, dude, your nipple is touching my shoulder. We're not going to move any faster, you know, by you breathing down my neck. And, you know, it's like, it's just insane. And the fact that this is such a hot country too, you know, it's very humid. It's like, dude, like it smells bad. We're like in this, and again, I'm like, dude, this is not going to go any faster if you're like shoving me. Right. So, you know, the concept of queuing. And then one of the first times I went to Asia, I went to Taiwan, and I was in the metro, and you know, growing up in Paris, like the metro is pretty good. Like it's a good metro system. It gets crowded, of course, like anywhere. And you have to sort of fight for your way on the train, but you know, it's a good system overall. And you know, I arrive in Taiwan, and you have like a line of like, it looks like it's just like these people like dropped on a chessboard, right? You have this straight line of people waiting to enter the door. I'm like, seriously, you guys, like it's rush hour. Like, what are you talking about? So I guess that was the Bangladeshi in me, you know, visiting Taiwan for the first time. But then when I'm in Bangladesh, I'm like, I feel Taiwanese. So, you know, I obviously, since I grew up in the Western world, I feel like the Western world is pretty good at queuing. In France, there's a lot more cutting and stuff than the US, but the US is good at queuing, I will say. And it feels good to be here and be in line. I was at the DMV yesterday, And it's like, oh man, this is a good line to be in, even though that's not usually the sentiment at the DMV.
That's so fascinating. Again, I never knew that. In France, there's a little bit more cutting. The story I always have for people is that, China hosted the 2008 Olympics, right? And before then, I think China wasn't on a lot of people's maps. And in fact, talking about international relations, I think after 2008 Olympics, a lot of international relations programs, whether undergrad or grad, really started focusing more on China. But in 2008, 2007, China tried really hard, again, because their government's different. They can put more effort into this control type thing. But they're like, guys, we have to learn how to queue. We have to learn. And it mostly succeeded in the big cities. So when I was in China last year, the only people that cut in front of me were rural, very rural people. But every city folk, and on top of that, even if you're not a city folk, if you were any type of Chinese person under the age of 30, you knew how to queue very well. But it was always we call them dama. Dama's aunties. The aunties from the countryside, they're migratory workers. So they're trying to return home for the holidays. They were the ones that were to cut me. I was like, that's fine. It's cultural. It's fine. But queuing is actually I'm sure there's a lot of papers, a lot of studies on it, but that actually could be a capstone project for me.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept because there is no right way to do it or wrong way to do it, right? Unless if you look at it from a scientific standpoint and you see what kind of queue, if you have a queue to enter a place that's a bottleneck, what kind of queue would make you go in faster, But yeah, it's kind of funny to see, and talking about China and the control thing, that's something in international relations that I have a really hard time with, because you go to Beijing right now, and up until the third ring, you're walking around, there's no noise at all. All of the motorcycles are electric. Virtually all the cars are electric, right? And there's so little congestion because they have that license plate system where if your license plate ends in a certain number, you're only allowed to enter the city on these days. And if it ends in this number, you can only enter these days. Can you imagine that in the United States? First off, the cities are not as well organized in terms of rings and stuff. So it's hard to do. But when I see that in China, I'm like, shit, man, maybe all this control ain't so bad. You're able to control a population that way. And you're mentioning the 2008 Olympics, same thing. They rounded up a bunch of government taxi workers, and they told them, you cannot spit on the ground of your taxi. And that was something that I heard from my mom when I was a kid. She was in Japan going to China, I think, and Japan, very clean, very good. You arrive in China, first thing the dude does in his taxi is spit on the floor of his taxi, right? And it's just different, right? It's just something you got to get used to. So interesting stuff.
I'm trying to find, so for people who don't know, I want to find a screenshot of this because, again, the fact that about the different rings is awesome. But for people who've never been to China, they don't completely get what you're talking about. So I'm going to try to find a good image of this because, again, like you said, the way the infrastructure is built in China, because again, it's just one party control, they can do it very well. So this is an example. Again, Beijing's way beyond this now. Beijing's at 7 or 8 or 9, but you see how there's layers and layers and layers of highways surrounding. And what Nico's saying is within the third, so Sen, right, within the third, it's very quiet. It's very regulated, very clean. It's a very interesting thing you noticed.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be honest, right? Especially if you go to a place several times over the course of the years, you see these kinds of developments. In Paris, same thing, right? So when I was a kid, I think the law was no diesel cars were allowed in certain of the districts of Paris, and now there's hundreds of square kilometers where just no cars are allowed at all. And so it's just car-free zones in Paris, and you now have bike boulevards instead and these kinds of things. And so to me, I like seeing that development, right? I think that it's moving us in the right direction, especially for large cities, minimizing the heat island effect. But it's cool to see over time, man. Go return to a place that's not yours and see how much it's changed is really cool. I think cooler than seeing your own home change, right? Because the concept of anthropology, to dumb it down, right? I'm not going to offend any anthropologists, but the concept of anthropology is to try to look at a society or at your world from a completely foreign eye, so that you can have as objective as a view as possible, as neutral of a view as possible, right? So like you're an alien observing this society, right? So that's the goal. And I think that when you visit a place that's so foreign to you, you're able to have that anthropological lens a lot better. So if you're able to have that anthropological lens one time, then you return 5 years later and you get it a second time, you're able to draw the comparisons a lot better. And that's one of the joys of traveling to me. You know, it's seeing these kinds of things happen. For
Yeah,
better.
exactly.
Yeah.
Traveling with almost like a social science purpose, right? It's a different way to travel, but I agree. Like I try to travel. It's like, oh, let's just go somewhere, take a break, or go somewhere, have fun. And I can't do it. I need to turn on an anthropology lens too. It's really funny.
Yeah, it's hard. Like, I think this is probably not a good thing, right? And I'm sure you struggle with the same thing, but I can't like go to a beach for a week and just like sit on the beach and go back to my hotel and sit on the beach and go back to my hotel and be satisfied with that. It's not really something that like, I don't know. It's just hard for me to do. With my sister, I went to Vanuatu, which is this small island nation off the coast of, well, not off the coast of, but like, you know, halfway in between Papua New Guinea and Australia, essentially, out in the Pacific Ocean. And we got this like we were at this like resort that had like a pool, and you know, you were next to the beach. I was like, is this all there is to do at this resort? And like there was a super cool town with a really cool market and stuff. And the resort was like, yeah, we only do like the bus to the center of the city upon request, and if there are enough people that want to take it. And I was like, all right, well, hopefully someone will want to take it with me every day, because I'm going to the market every day. And, you know, I went to the market. I ended up going every single day. I didn't stay on the resort at all. And it's a lot more interesting. Like you go to the fish market, you look at, there's so many things to observe, right? Like how do the transactions work, right? Who's selling, right? Sometimes it's like in some countries, it's only men selling. In some countries, it's only women selling. In some countries, it's the kids selling, right? So there are so many things to look at just like the central market that are a lot more interesting than just going to the beach, in my opinion. But
yeah, I mean, I completely understand your mentality, and I sort of realized this like consciously last year, because when I'm in China, as long as I don't open my mouth and they hear that, okay, this guy's mannerisms a little different, right? I can blend in. So I was in China and I was doing the same thing. I was like almost like doing an anthropology thing. I just like walked around, kept my mouth shut, and just observed. And I was like, this is so cool. I've never done that before, because normally, you know, if I'm walking around somewhere, especially whether it's Europe or America or Mexico or whatever, people would see like he looks different, right? But in China, I'm different, but I don't look different. So I could actually like be an anthropologist. It's really cool. So last year I had so much joy. I was just walking around. Let's observe. Let's sense things. And so, yeah, I totally understand your mentality.
Yeah. It's cool. Like for me, it's a little harder to blend in a place like China, and especially due to the fact that culturally there's not really a concept of differentiating or of not differentiating foreigners. So like it's completely normal to be xenophobic. It's completely normal to, right? So I was actually, something that I like to do when I travel too is try new airlines. All right. And particularly a lot of Asian airlines are some of my favorites. Like Starlux Airlines is actually my favorite airline of all time. It's a Taiwanese airline. And then I love Asiana. I love Korean Air. They have like amazing food, these kinds of things. And so I don't even know where I was. I think I was in Singapore and I was going to San Francisco. And so I wanted to take an Air China flight because I'd never taken Air China, and I've heard very mixed things about it because it's like their biggest state-owned one, I think. And so I was reading on Reddit all these things. These guys like posting on Reddit like, yeah, I'm white, and they clearly were treating me differently because I'm white. I was the only white guy on the flight. And I was like, are we sure about this? Like, are you sure it's because you're white? Right. And then I arrive at the gate in Singapore. They changed my seat at the gate. First off, I was like in the front in like an extra legroom space, and then they moved me to the back in a seat that I didn't even know existed. Okay, I was like in 58F. I'm like, damn, didn't know the numbers went this high in these planes, but all right. So I'm like, okay, first kind of bad experience, and then so we're now on the flight. I'm like in my middle seat near the bathroom in the back, and they start doing the meal service. They serve the dude to my left. They serve the dude to my right. and then they don't serve me. I'm like, damn, like I'm right here, all right. And they finish the thing, then they come back to me, and then they serve me. I was like, was it like intentional to serve me dead last? And mind you, this is a Star Alliance airline, which I'm supposed to have, status on supposedly.
Yeah.
And so that happens. I'm like, all right, that was a one-off. All right, I'm not gonna. And the flight attendants were rude and stuff. I was like, okay, that's a one-off. I'm not gonna judge too harshly. Same exact thing happened from Beijing to San Francisco. I was like, all right, once is a coincidence, twice it's two coincidences. So next time you're on thin ice, Air China. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. And there have definitely been some times, especially when I go to places in China with fewer foreigners, where you definitely feel the xenophobia, right? Like it's just not a foreign concept for them to blind those things like we have in the United States, because people say the United States is racist and all these things, and that's true, right? That's true to an extent. But you travel and you realize like how mixed the United States is and how well everyone blends together realistically, right? Like day to day. Like you were to drop like 30,000 or let's say like 300,000 white Americans in Beijing to live there for a year, like civil war would happen, I think. I think things would not go well. So, you gotta praise the United States where praise is due. It's true that we do have a lot of problems with systemic racism and all those things, but overall, right, the blends work quite well. And when you have a foreigner come in, right, it's not abnormal. Like you probably will go on about your day today and you'll hear probably 2 different accents or 3 different accents, right? That's not abnormal. That's not abnormal. Whereas these are countries that I go to where I'm like the first white person they've ever seen, right? What a world of difference that is. And that is why the behavior differs. Absolutely. In my opinion. So
Yeah, it's a good perspective you tell people, because obviously America has its problems, but if you've gone to public school in America, especially, you've been taught that America has its problems, right? Whereas in a lot of other countries, they might not even have been taught that they have problems. People under the table / might talk about it, but like their school system isn't like emphasizing that all the time, like a lot of our school systems are. And on top of that, just usually, unless you grow up in like a very rural area of America, you've seen other types of people and heard different types of accents, right? Whereas in China, yeah, they definitely, especially if they're not in like big tier 1 or tier 2 cities, they've not seen foreigners. But beyond that, like when we say accents in China, I say we like I'm Chinese, but when we say accents in China, we hear other accents, but it's other regions of China. So like Chinese people oftentimes discriminate based on the region in China. So like that's another thing about humanity. So this is again sociology, anthropology, but we're always going to find differences. We're always going to find reasons to like self, us, in group, out group. So in China, it's like, oh, those Southerners, oh, those people from Henan, oh, those, right? It's like that. But again, I'm so sorry you had a bad experience with Air China. Oh, I feel so bad about that, man.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, I love China. It's one of my favorite countries. Like, you shouldn't be ranking countries side by side, but it's definitely in my top 3. Overall, I love Chinese people. My high school was very Chinese, actually, because I went to high school in the Silicon Valley. And I've been on several different Chinese airlines. So I've been on China Southern and China Eastern, and those airlines are all Hainan Air. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Hainan Air. So I've been on a lot of great airlines, but China Airlines specifically gets this complaint. And China Airlines, like you can find so many Reddit threads about this too, right? So I was reading those beforehand, being like, that's a boogeyman. And then I experienced something that was like, shit, man, I can't really defend you that well, Air China, So, I mean, I'll give them another chance for sure, no doubt about it. But I love China, so one bad experience will not negate anything out of that.
That's so funny. So how many countries have you been to now? Have you counted?
Yeah, I have 2 different lists of countries. So there's this guy, his name is Harry Matsitis. He's like the most well-traveled person in the world. And he started this app called Nomad Mania. And like the standards for travel on Nomad Mania are different for, just stepping foot in the country. So I have my Nomad Mania list, which is like sort of a higher caliber list. Like I can really feel like I can say I visited this country. And then I have the list of every single country like I've stepped foot in, not including layovers. Okay. Obviously, because that doesn't count. So my true list, I've been to 98 countries in my life. And then my Nomad Mania list is like, I think it's, I can check actually, but I think it's 85. So I take out countries that, you know, I haven't been to in a very long time, countries that I've maybe spent less than 24 hours in, like Liechtenstein, right, where you just kind of like pass through and have lunch in a village. And so those are the kind of standards that are different. So yeah, close to 100 countries I've been to. Yeah.
That's very inspiring, because I've only spent some time in Canada, spent some time in Mexico, and spent some time in China. So it's like China, Canada, America. So only 4 for me, right? So,
but you know, you don't have to go to a ton to get the same experience. Yeah. It's more about how you approach the way that you travel, and I trust you enough to know that when you go somewhere, you have enough of a pluralistic view to understand what you're experiencing and what you're seeing. So you don't have to go to a billion countries to call yourself well-traveled, right? If you go to 2, but you really experience them all, I'm happy with you calling yourself well-traveled. Why not? So yeah, it's just the way.
Yeah, sorry, I totally interrupted, but
no.
What is, besides, we've talked about Indonesia, we've talked about China, and we talked a little bit about Kazakhstan. What is, from your travels, another like super mind-blowing or like something experience you always tell people when people ask you travel stories?
Man, I mean, there are a few that I like shouldn't really talk about. I actually had a meeting recently with a guy from the State Department because I'm interested in working with the State Department eventually. I told him, listen, man, like I've been to some of these countries, and you know, I know it's gonna be hard to get a security clearance. Yeah, you know, based on some of the things I've done. And you know, I hope my mom doesn't watch this, but I've been arrested in a few countries, right? So there's that as well. The most mind-blowing experience was over the course of, let's say, I think it was 4 days. And this was when I went to Syria, Jordan, Palestine. So I was like doing a road trip in the Middle East. And first off, we take this bus. I land into Jordan, into Amman, Jordan at like 3 a.m. I was coming from Turkey. And we arrive in Jordan, and we have a bus to go to Damascus at like 6 a.m. So we get a taxi to go to the bus terminal, and oh my God, it's like the most chaotic place on earth. And we're like, okay, well, we're too deep into this already. And I found this random guy on the internet to tell me how to get to Syria from Jordan, because there's like no information online. This was right after the rebel government took over. So that's why I thought it would be a good time to go, because the Assad government just fell. So I was like, okay, it's now or never. And so it was now. And so I take the bus. There are obviously only Syrians on the bus. They're like so confused. I'm like with my friend. So there's these 2 white boys on the bus. It's just a bunch of Syrian immigrants who live in Jordan who are now going back to Damascus. And it's a very confusing experience. We're exhausted. All right. Last time we slept in a hotel was 3 nights ago, because like we took a night train from Istanbul to Ankara, and then we didn't have a hotel that night in Ankara, and we took our flight from Ankara to Jordan. So we were like pissed, exhausted, 2 nights in a row of like no sleep essentially. And so we're like tired, trying to keep our eyes open, trying to not get like in trouble at the border. We arrive at the border, and like just such a crazy series of events. So I have 3 passports. My friend has 2. So he's Costa Rican American. I'm French, American, Croatian. And our goal was to use a certain set of passports to enter Syria, and then use a certain set of passports to enter Palestine, because the Palestinian border is controlled by the Israelis, even on the West Bank side. And so we would have to enter the West Bank on our American passports with a passport that doesn't have a Syrian stamp on it, right? Because if you have a Syrian stamp on it, they're like, no, you cannot enter. So we're like, okay, we're gonna enter Syria, me on my French, you on your Costa Rican, and then we're gonna enter the Palestinian territories on our Americans. So my friend hands the passport to the guy, and he may as well have given him a Legoland passport. You know, like this dude had never heard of Costa Rica before. And we're at the desk, we're like waiting, we're not really sure what's happening. I like lean over to look at his monitor screen. He's Googling Costa Rica. Wow. He's like making sure this is a real place. I was like, all right, dude, we're in trouble. And so we go through that. Takes us a while, dude, but we eventually get through it. We get back on the bus. We go down a little bit. The bus stops, and then these like dudes in basically Taliban gear, right? Like pajamas, flip flops, and Soviet era AK-47s get on the bus. They must have heard that there were these two white guys. They take us off the bus. The bus keeps going without us, with all of our shit on it. So,
Oh no.
yeah, and the thing is too, when you enter Syria, this actually just changed last week. But when I went there are no ATMs, no credit card transactions. Whatever cash you come in with is whatever cash you're going to have while you're there. So we have like maybe 400 US, with which we have to pay for our hotels, our transportation, like a bunch of stuff. And so we get taken off the bus by these dudes with their AK-47s. We're like in the middle of the desert at this point, right? And we're surrounded by like 8 dudes speaking Arabic to us with their guns and their flip-flops. And we're like, shit, I do not know what you're talking about. And then they start speaking Arabic slower. And I'm like, dude, if you speak Arabic slower, it's not going to make me understand better. And so we're trying to like communicate and stuff. We have our passports, our phones, and our cash. And the rest of our stuff, like our bags and stuff, are all on the bus. And eventually they load us into this car. And then we start driving backwards back towards Jordan. I was like, oh, shit. And then they take us off. They make us pay a bribe. And we were there for a while, dude. Like we were there for a long time. They make us pay this bribe. We pay the bribe. And, I don't know if you've ever paid a bribe or if anyone's ever paid a bribe. I guess it's not probably a very common experience. But, you get used to it over time. Usually the way that I do it is you slap an amount on the table and then they either nod or they're like, are you kidding me, dude? So you kind of just like keep going up without showing how much you have total, of course. But you kind of try to like do a negotiation in a way that you won't spend too much money, but you may want to make sure you satisfy them because you're in their captivity essentially.
Yeah.
And so we end up landing on $150 US. So out of like our $380, now we're down 150, right? We're down like 40%. And we still got a lot of stuff to pay for. So, all right, we pay the bribe and we were there for a long time. And they asked us all these questions. And we already had a backstory that we had created earlier. So we were religious pilgrims that were students studying religion. And the reason we were in Syria and in Palestine and in Israel was because we were on a religious pilgrimage. We were going to visit certain churches. We were recreating some of the past of some of the saints. That was the backstory. So we stuck with it. And just in case we got separated, right, which we did, we had the same story. So that was sort of what we ran with. Hey, we're like these religious scholars and we're doing this religious pilgrimage, that kind of thing. Took us a really long time, but we eventually got off. And once we paid the bribe, they were actually super nice. They drove us back to our bus. So we caught up back with our bus. Wow. And then, yeah. And so we're on the side of the road. We get back on the bus. We get on the bus. Everyone there on the bus looks so relieved. I'm like, you look relieved. And then we sit down. There was like this woman sitting next to us, like across the aisle, who was like maybe like a college age Syrian woman who was like going to college in Jordan. And she puts her hand on my friend and she's like, we're all so happy to see you. And he's like, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, we didn't know where you went. And I was like, if these people who do this trip often, and who have seen shit and who do this border often were scared for us at the border, like, I'm so glad we made it out alive. Like that would have been horrible. And so they're like also relieved. I'm like, man, good thing we didn't know this before we got taken off the bus and escorted out to the border and stuff. But it was pretty chill. It was just a rebel government. So it was very like disorganized, no formal anything. And then we made it to Damascus. Damascus is like one of my favorite places in the world. It was amazing, beautiful. And then, we're spending all of our cash. And when we exit the country, we're like, we better not have to pay a bribe. We took the night bus to have less commotion at the border. And we left with the equivalent of $15 US in Turkish lira, Jordanian dinar, euros. Like we were strapped. So if we had a bribe to pay, we were getting shot. But we made it out and we made it to Jordan. And then the next day we went to Palestine. So, and then we got in trouble with the IDF and stuff there. So it was quite a series of days. And then after that, we went to Petra. So after we got like in trouble with the IDF and like detained at the border, and we got denied exit of Israel. And so then we had to like smuggle across the border the next day. It was like a whole big thing. We like stayed at this Palestinian dude's house for the night and he helped us strategize. It was crazy, dude. But we made it out alive. And then we went to Petra the next day, and we met this like Bedouin dude who took us on his horses through the Arabian desert. So we're like on the Arabian desert, like on our horses for like hours. And then he's like, dude, look over that cliff. We look over the cliff. It's Petra. I was like,
Wow.
what? And like, it was super sick. And then we were like in Wadi Rum too, in the middle of nowhere, with like these Bedouin dudes with like their tribe of camels and stuff. It was super cool. But yeah, so that was a pretty crazy series of days. And then like ending on the like this Bedouin dude who took us in the back of his pickup truck, and we weren't sure if we were gonna get arrested, but we were just so tired we did not care. We're like, we escaped two rogue governments. I think we're good. So yeah, it's interesting.
Wow. And yesterday when I was getting coffee.
Yeah. No, people ask me often, like, is it hard to come back from a trip? And when you have like such high adrenaline moments for so many days in a row like that, like, yeah, then I come back and I do my laundry, like seriously. But it's something that feels really good too, right? To come back after having that kind of experience, because you're like, nice and calm. But yeah, it's interesting. It definitely some good times.
The only experience, again, not as extreme and story worthy as your story is, last year when I was in China, I was in one of these like small touristy but like quote unquote ancient towns. So like most Westerners don't know about it because they don't know how to get there. But there was a random American woman who found her way there. It was so I could tell how scared she looked. She's like, "Oh my God, I don't want to do it. I rode a random like anonymous bus here," and like her Airbnb was in at night because this isn't like an old historic town. There was no lights, so it's almost like you're walking through an ancient Chinese ghost town to get to the Airbnb. No. I remember, and I talked to her the next day. I was like, "How did you find it?" I still don't know how she found it, but I can imagine she was having some of the similar experience. And thank goodness she met me, because then she's like, "Oh my God, there's another American here." But I remember before she met, she was so scared, and I was like, "You have way more cojones than I do, like just like traveling by yourself to this like quote unquote ancient town that at night didn't have street lights and stuff like that." It was crazy. I was like, okay, you and her could be like travel buddies or something.
Yeah. No, it's like the thing is too, when those things are actually happening to you, when you're in these positions, you're not actually thinking about it that much. Like there was not one point in time where I was like scared for my life, even though I should have been, right? Like I could have been kidnapped so many times and like, shot and killed so many times, but you're not actually thinking about that because you're just purely thinking about logistics. Like, how am I going to get myself out of this? Right. And, that's probably how she was feeling too. And like with that pure determination is how you get out of it. Right. Like you have no other choice. Right. Especially if you're traveling on a budget and stuff, you have several restrictions that you're putting on yourself and that you have. And you're like, all right, dude, this is like, I need to lock in and I need to get myself out of this pickle. And it happens all the time. Right. Like I was in Tajikistan this summer. I was actually, so Central Asian borders are like notoriously difficult. So I wanted to try one, but it was not that bad. But there's always like a common theme that's recurring, which is you have someone who comes out and helps you out of their own like willingness. And that's always what saves you essentially. So I'm like crossing from Uzbekistan to Tajikistan. The border crossing took a little bit of time. It was chill, but then I'm on the other side, and I got this new debit card issued by my bank, and I didn't realize it until I started traveling, but it was not a MasterCard or a Visa. It was like a Diners Club. And I was like, that shit only works in the US. Like I am cooked. So I could not take any cash out all summer. And Tajikistan is a cash-based society. And so I was out of cash. I was completely out of cash. I was like, I need to get from the border, and it's a 6-hour drive through the mountains to get to Dushanbe, the capital. And I had a flight the next day out of Dushanbe, and I had a meeting the next morning in Dushanbe with one of my collaborators. I'm like, I got to get to Dushanbe somehow. And I meet this like Russian Muslim family, and they're like, you want to come in my car? I was like, yeah, sure. We go on a 6-hour road trip through the Tajik mountains on the Pamir Highway. And then at one point we pull over on the side of the road, and she's like, hey, we're like at my mom's house. And I was like, all right, no other choice. So we go to her mom's house. They've been waiting for this woman for so long. So she's Tajik, but she lives in Russia, and she was there with her 2 kids. And so we now enter this house, and they've been waiting for her for so long, and they have this random big ass white dude with them. I'm like, shit, I'm crashing your party so hard. And then, they like sit me down and everything, like, and there's this feast in front of me, like insane feast, and like all these people, and they ask me if I want to marry their daughters and these kinds of things. I'm like, damn, bro, like I'm in the middle of the mountains right now. I'm like trying to get to Dushanbe, please. And then eventually this one guy who was in the neighborhood took me to Dushanbe, and I got to Dushanbe. But that's the thing, like, dude, you got to improvise so much, right? And then I had no cash. So I had my hotel prepaid for, thankfully, because there's nothing I can buy otherwise. I skipped meals for 2 or 3 days in a row because I didn't have cash, right? In Samarkand, Uzbekistan, there were like a few places I could get cash, or I could eat with credit card. But yeah, so like 2 days, no eating. And then I didn't have a way to get to the airport in Dushanbe, right? I didn't have any cash. So I walked to the airport with my bag, and it wasn't too bad of a walk, but it was my only option. So I was like, all right, I'll make the most of it. So I don't think I've ever walked from a city center to an airport before, but I had to because I was strapped for cash. So, the improvisation is always what ends up saving you, I'd say.
It's so funny because I have a friend, he's Chinese American too, and he's like the king of bad improvisation. Like, he's one of my friends from LA, where like we would park at a parking lot at a mall, and like we go to the mall, and then he would have trouble finding his car afterwards. He's that kind of dude. But one time he took us, this was pre-pandemic, so the US and Cuba were more chill back then. He took a spontaneous trip to Cuba for some reason, and he also ran out of cash. But what was freaking crazy was, I think from his mom's side or something, because I think his mom was still a Chinese citizen, he had a Chinese bank card. And the Chinese bank card, at least back then, worked in Cuba. So he used the Chinese bank card to get RMB, and he had cash in Cuba, but like not dollars, like RMB that he could then like switch to Cuban. I don't know if it's dineros, whatever the Cubans, apologies, I forgot what the currency is called. But yeah, so like random improvisation like this, like when you travel, when you're pushed to your element, it pushes out some of the things you didn't even know you had in you. He just randomly was like, oh no, I'm about to starve. He looked into his wallet. He found a Chinese bank card from his mom, and that saved him on his Cuba trip. And he also experienced, like, once he had some cash, like Cubans would help him out. And one Cuban also like, you want to marry my daughter? It's the same thing.
Yeah. No, it's always the same thing. It's like a foreigner. They see a foreigner, they're like, "Wow, you're so handsome." I'm like, "No, I'm just white. Trust me. Like, that's all you're seeing here."
Yeah. Wow. Like travel stories. I forgot how fun it is to exchange travel stories, and part of it is because I would call myself a local traveler. Like every day, I want to take a different path to school, or I want to take a different path to the coffee shop I go to. That excuse me. That's something I developed during those pandemic years, because those pandemic years, you were more kind of limited as to where you would go. So I would explore. Thank goodness I was on a beach, even though I'm also not the type of person to really like go to the beach, but it forced me, okay, every day I would check out a different part of the beach since I'm on this beach right now. So yeah, like that's how I usually think of travel. Is like, oh, it's better just to like really know your neighborhood. But then when you think about the elements, the anthropological elements, and then the what you do under high intensity that you don't realize until later, it's high intensity. Those stories are so fun to exchange and reflect on.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think it's also important to be able to enjoy where you live and like your immediate surroundings too. Like as you said, right? I do meet a lot of people who travel a lot. So obviously, because you see like one other white dude in rural Uganda, and you're like, oh my God, let me go talk to him, see what he's doing here. And in certain parts of the world, it's always a bad story. Like I was in the Philippines doing research last summer, and I was on this small island in the rural Philippines, in southern Philippines. Like I see the story is always like, oh, I met my Filipino wife and blah blah, or like they're like a scuba diving instructor, and they're clearly like also a sex tourist on the side. It's like, all right, bro, like I know what kind of person you are. But anyways, that's beside the point. But I meet a lot of people who like travel so much, and they like are always looking forward to the next thing, right? Like there's always something that's coming up that they're looking forward to. They're never in a place and they're like, dude, this is great, right? Like they're in the airport, they're planning their next flight. They're in a hotel, they're booking their next hotel, right? You're at home, and they're just thinking about their next trip. It's like, dude, you also got to be able to enjoy like what's around you, right? And the last 4 years I was living in not Central California, on the central coast of California, which is arguably one of the most beautiful places in the world, of course. But I'm still like, you still got to enjoy it and actively be like, okay, this is a good place that I'm living at, and these kinds of things. So being a local tourist is just as important. When I was growing up in Paris, like probably fewer than half of my classmates had like gone up the Eiffel Tower, for example, right? And I was in like a pretty rich neighborhood of Paris. Like you have the means, it's not like anything preventing you. It's just like you just don't care enough to explore your local area. But yeah, the curious mind is win.
Yeah, one thing I will say to support your point is one of the blessings that I had being forced to move back to DC was I can finally appreciate this area with all the knowledge I've learned about how to be in the moment, how to appreciate areas. So now it's like, because, middle school, high school and stuff, I didn't really get to use all the resources and really appreciate what the DC area is. And now it's like, oh, I came back for grad school. Let's really take advantage of this area. So like you said, you got to be able to enjoy where you're at, because I've definitely met travelers like that too, where it's like, I'm like, do you ever like stop for a second? That's like a very interesting trope that I thought I was the only one that's met travelers like that, but because you're very well traveled, you've met travelers like that. It's like, well, you're only going to stay here for a week, and then you're going to go here for 3 weeks, and then you're going to go here for 5 weeks. Like, are you running away from something?
Yeah. No, that's something that people ask me a lot too, because it's like a common thing. But I think that wherever I am, I'm enjoying it. So whether that's in the United States or abroad, wherever it is, I'm always liking where I am. So I'm not too afraid of that. But I do move around too much, to be honest with you. Like, I would go on like weekend trips in undergrad. So I went to Japan for the weekend, for example. I went skiing in Hokkaido for the weekend. Like, bro, honestly, it was really fun and it was really cool. But that's like embarrassing from an environmental standpoint. It's embarrassing from like not being able to stay in one place standpoint. Like, but
there was that famous YouTuber back in the day. I think he like took a trip to Australia just to take a dump in the airport and then flew back to America or something like that.
Yeah, like when I do those things, I don't really tell people around me, like, oh, dude, I'm gonna go to Guatemala for the weekend, because to me, also, like, most people don't travel that much. And it kind of feels like an FU. It's like, oh, dude, by the way, right? So it is kind of awkward. Like it feels a little awkward. But when I travel for work, like all this summer and stuff, and when I'm doing things for work, I feel less guilty about it, because I'm like, I'm being productive while I'm doing this. I'm like trying to get something out of it. I'm talking to locals, I'm collaborating with locals, and we're seeing like what's happening. So yeah, but it's a lot of people have a lot of mixed opinions on the kinds of things that I do. So I mean,
and what percentage of your travel is for work? I would say it's like 30%, right? You travel quite a lot for work now.
Well, this summer it was pretty much all of it. So I went to 26 countries, I think, and I had meetings in like every place pretty much. That doesn't mean, I'm not like having fun and going to a tourist attraction, but there's some places where I don't have any time for that. Like when I was in Kenya, I didn't do much tourism at all. I actually, you know what? That's a lie, because I did a half-day safari. All right. But the rest of the time I was there for work. And yeah, so pretty much everywhere I was having meetings and stuff this summer. So it's interesting, because traveling is tiring, and then you add the work component into it, and it's even more tiring. But it's still something that I deeply enjoy. And something that I really don't like is I will always meet people who like minimize my experience because I'm young, which is like chill, right? Like I know I don't know everything, and I know I still have a lot to learn. But what I'm talking about is I'm in a plane sitting next to a dude who's like clearly traveling for work too. And I'm like, hey, like, what are you doing? I strike up conversation. And then he's like, yeah, I'm traveling for my company or whatever. And then I tell him, yeah, I'm also traveling for this. And then he's like, how old are you? I'm like, oh, I'm 21, or I'm 22 now, but, and he's like, oh, dude, well, enjoy it while you're young. It gets tiring real fast. I'm like, I understand that, but like, why does everyone say that? Like, it can't be that bad. Maybe we're just a different type of traveler, right? Like I've been traveling like crazy since I was a little kid. Like I'm haven't gotten tired of planes in 22 years, right? So like how bad does it get? Like this, I don't know. It's hard for me to understand, but then I meet some people who are like not like that, but so many people they're like, dude, you better enjoy it right now while you enjoy it. And it's like, bro, come on. Like give me a break, you know?
This is
Enjoy.
quite an interesting phenomenon because I was never that like older person to start like almost talking down to young people, right? And I did that the first time in like 2022. Was it 20? Yeah. It was like December of 2022 because I had a viewer from another channel who, really liked my channel. And like, he was 21. He was like your age and he just didn't have his life together. And he was like the fifth kid. So like his parents didn't care anymore because they already raised 4 kids. They're like, we're just going to be like super libertarian about our 5th kid. So like he had no guidance. And I just couldn't hold it. I just laid down the law for him. I'm like, here's what you need to do. A, B, C, D. I'm like, wow, I'm like being a parent to him. I'm being a big brother. I'm like, I'm sorry if I'm doing this, but nobody's doing this to you now. And I was like, wow, I guess you don't understand why certain people of a certain age are going to do that until you get to that age, right? I was like, okay, I kind of understand it. Still, I aspire not to be like that. But that was one of the few times I was like, I gave like a big brother or uncle moment to like a younger person. So I'm not justifying people trying to like pull the age card on you, but that was a moment I always think about. I was like, oh my goodness. So maybe they had some biases in their minds,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, maybe this kid's a kid who didn't have his stuff together. Oh, let me like try to tell him, like that. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, there's always like the main issue that I have with it is that it usually doesn't come out until I say my age specifically. It's like clearly you don't care about my experience. Clearly you don't care about, the things that I do. You only care about the fact that I'm younger than you, which like has merits, right? Like I don't want to sound at all like I feel like I have my life figured out and these kinds of things because I don't, right? Like I'm still young and I know I still have a lot to learn. But for example, I actually just shaved my mustache that I had. I think I look stupid with a mustache and it's extremely uncomfortable. But people all summer were asking me, well, how old are you? I'm like, that's not, do you ask someone who's like 40, who looks 40 years old, how old they are when you're in a business meeting? No, right? Like that's not something you do. And that's not a question that I want to receive because that means that now you're going to make judgments based on an external factor.
Yeah.
Look at what I'm presenting to you. Look at the work that I've done. Look at the groundwork I've laid for you. And then give me your comments.
Yeah.
Don't tell me how old are you and then do it based on that, right? Because I've been doing this for maybe three years now. And I don't have it all figured out, but I advise myself. I surround myself with a lot of people who advise me, like from NASA, my professors, right? People from other universities, people from that former coworkers that I worked with in Peru and stuff like that. So I try to advise myself as much as possible to have all the groundwork laid out as much as possible so that you don't judge me based on my age. So don't enter a meeting and be like, by the way, like, how old are you? And I had a guy who was very frank with me. I was in the UAE and I had a meeting with this guy and we spent pretty much all day together. We visited some farms and we had a very productive meeting. It was ridiculously good. And at the end of the day, he was like, and by the way, how old are you? And I was like, oh, great. And I was like, well, when I emailed you, I was 21 years old. And he's like, if I'm being honest, if I knew you were 21 when you emailed me, I probably would not have answered. Oh. And, like, I appreciate the honesty because it's true. Like, I do understand why that mentality exists, right? But my entire life, it's kind of been like this because I've always tried to be ahead of the curve and like ahead of what I'm doing. So I feel like at least, in the last 2 years, I've taken like 130 flights. In my lifetime, I don't even want to know how many it is. So, I have this accumulated experience in less amount of time, right? And like time still takes its course and it still takes time to learn certain things. But there is also like this condensed experience that I try to have, internships every year since I was like 15, right? That's work experience, right? That's something that I've done in the field. There are people my age who have never had an internship, never had a job and are graduating college, right? But you're equating the two of us next to each other just based on the age thing, right? But the ageism like in the United States is just like, you look at the experience that you have, right? Like I'll show you what I did. I have an accumulated like 6 years of experience if you add up like all the months of like internships and half-time jobs and things that I've done, right? So I don't know. It's something that's sort of hard to tackle when you're young, especially.
The one thing I'll tell you is, again, because of the life I lived in LA, I met a lot of people. This is applying statistics. This is a biased sample because people who are in LA are a specific type of mentality a lot of times. But I will tell you from my experience, nobody has it figured out. Even people on their deathbeds, I'll be honest, don't have it figured out. So if that's a reassurance, take it for what it is. But I realized that a long time ago. I'm like, anyone that like pretends they have it figured out, they don't. They're just putting on a better facade. And again, I'm not telling people you don't have it figured out. I'm just saying you always have to keep a little bit open in the back of your mind that whatever worldview you have, whatever thing you think that's 100% certain, it's probably not, right? In statistics, for example, what is your significance value, your significance level, right? You got to always keep a little bit of that. So long story short, part of, again, I'm interpreting what some of these people think is that part of it is, it just might be their own insecurity. They're like, I don't have it figured out. I don't want to like interact with someone who has it even more unfigured out than me. As part of it could be an insecurity thing.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting because then I meet the flip side of adults. So this professor, Dr. Andrew Fricker, who has helped me develop Open Farm and has been pretty much my biggest supporter for the last 4 years. He's like complete opposite, right? And that's what I admire about him. You meet these adults who I aspire to be like. You continue to ask questions, right? You listen first. When we go and we apply that to the way that we do field work. So I was with him in Kenya, and we're going to the field. We're talking to farmers. All right, traditionally, this farmer maybe has an education level to like the 3rd grade, right? Perhaps. And then traditionally, someone will come in and tell them what to do, right? These are the agronomic principles that I know based on my research. That's not what we would do, right? We go to a farm, maybe a farm visit is 2-3 hours. The first like 80% of that is just us listening to them, right? Like, I don't have any local knowledge of the farming scene in Kisumu, right? And then once you listen to them, you can give way better recommendations, right? Because they continue to tell you exactly what they're experiencing. And if they tell you exactly what they're experiencing, you can tell them exactly what you have experienced and how that is synonymous with what they do. And then you can also take from their experiences and use that, right? Like, I didn't know before I went to Western Kenya that so many farmers in Kenya have access to fertilizer. They just don't take it because they don't have the right recommendations from the people on how to use it, right? So you have access to this free fertilizer. If I were to just come on the farm, I would just have told them the exact same thing that everyone else has told them, which is, hey, just use this fertilizer, right? Which is not at all like the right approach. So by listening to them first, we learned, okay, they have access to this. They have access to this for free, and they're not using it. So now let me ask some more questions. Why are you not using it? How do you feel about it, right? These kinds of things. And if you actually listen, they know a lot more than what you would imagine perhaps before arriving based on your biases, right? So that's that philosophy that we apply to Open Farm and to the field work is sort of the same way that I want to approach life. And this is how this professor also approaches life, right? Like he's, I don't know, maybe in his 40s, right? And he's still always asking questions. And he feels like everyone around him can teach him something, which is true, right? So you gotta be humble and you gotta be malleable mostly, right? Like make sure that you take everything into account, even if someone gives you like a bad faith sort of, what's it called? Like feedback, right? Someone tells you, gives you criticism in bad faith. Well, there might be some part of truth in that, right? The delivery might not be great, but think about it. Okay, what makes them say that? Why did they want me to feel the way I feel right now because of what they said, right? So yeah, I think a lot of like older people that I work with just lose that malleability. And that's something that I'm really going to try to keep as much as possible. But, you know, we'll see. I'm sure there are some people watching right now. They're like, oh, this 22-year-old idiot, you know, like you're going to see when life hits you, buddy. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see.
I think that malleability is very powerful. And another thing to highlight is being able to listen well, right? I think those are skills that everyone can work better at. And
Yeah.
yeah, being able to listen. I'm the same. The joke I always tell people is sometimes I'm too good a listener. And then people think because I'm listening so well, I agree with everything they say. So that's actually something I'm going to work on in grad school. It's like, okay, I'm the same exact mentality, Nico. I think everyone can teach me something.
Yeah.
But what I need to get better at, and again, I might change this analysis of myself in the future as I go through grad school, but I think I need to get better at also letting them know where I stand. So they don't go, oh, he agrees with me with everything. Because sometimes if they think you agree with them with everything, just because you're a good listener, sometimes the conversation gets really dumb. I'm just going to be honest. They start like not using their logical thinking. They start like sending you propaganda. And it's like by the time you set a boundary, they're like, but it's almost like a cognitive dissonance in their mind.
Yeah.
They're like, but I thought you agreed with everything. How is he being such a jerk all of a sudden? It's like, no, I'm just listening. You just misinterpreted me listening. So that's the one thing, but I do agree with you completely. I will never change the fact that I think I can learn something from everyone. I've learned stuff from talking to 4-year-olds. I'm being honest. My mom's coworker one time, not a former college friend. So my mom's former college friend brought like a grandkid one time to my home. And I talked to the grandkid and I learned stuff from the grandkid because like, how do you understand Gen Alpha if you don't talk to Gen Alpha, right? So that's what I mean. I'm always of that mentality. That's why like we get along so well because I feel like I learned so much talking to you, right? So yeah, I 100% will always support the people who think they will be able to learn from anyone. So I 100% agree with you on that.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the map thing a little bit, right? It's like it doesn't matter. Maybe someone has zero to offer, right? Which is never the case, right? But let's give someone a blank slate. They have absolutely nothing to offer. They know nothing about any topic. What they do have, they're still a human being, right? So they still have a perspective on something, right? So if that's the only thing you get out of someone, fine. That's no big deal, right? There are plenty of people that I do not respect at all, who I do think are like pure idiots, but you can still learn something from them because ask yourself a different set of questions, right? Like, why do they think this way? Why do they have this bias? Like, there's always some question to be asked about someone and something that you can ask to someone to learn from them. I have this friend, and when you ask her a sort of difficult question, she always like will take a pause, and like it makes you feel like almost insecure, right? Because you're like, oh shit, like she's really thinking about it. And that's like the inverse of what you just talked about like the inverse of like being a yes man, right? Because she'll think critically about every single thing that you say, and then you're like, ah, shit. Did I display my argument well? Did I explain what I was talking about well? And then she'll come back with a really poised response. So, that's super respectable. And maybe on the farther end of like where you want to be, because maybe you don't want to think so deeply about what everyone has to say, because maybe not everything is so intelligent, but it's a perspective to take into account. And like, how can I incorporate some of what she does into the way that I converse with people and stuff?
Yeah, I have a friend. So I might have told you this when I was when I met you at Georgetown, but I have like a brain trust group of 3 engineers I always consult with. So they're my like when I need people to pause and break down and analyze everything I do, right? They're my people. So like I definitely know people like your friend who's just like everything you say, they're going to really pick apart at it. And even if you said something in jest, they're still going to like critically analyze it. And you're like, no, this is a joke. Just like roll with it for a second, right? So like, I do know people like that, but those people are very important in my life too, because sometimes they'll challenge assumptions you didn't even know you have. And it's like, whoa, that's pretty cool.
No, 100%. And, what you can also seek like specific type of people to have that diverse sort of thought. So growing up, I did a ton of geography competitions, like all kinds, and academic competitions like that. I don't know if you can come to this conclusion on your own, but it draws in a lot of autism.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So you have a lot of autistic people. I had a lot of autistic people in my circles because they were interested in geography and interested in geography competitions. And that draws just a certain kind of person. I also played a lot of chess when I was like very young. And
I play a lot of chess too.
So it's like you have these autistic people, and something I really appreciate is it's such a different perspective, because a lot of autistic people, especially who are very good at masking, part of what they do, like I don't want to like psychoanalyze anyone, but this is my understanding from talking to them and understanding the way they operate, is they have to think a lot more about every interaction. They have to think a lot more about every gesture that they make. So they have to be a lot more dialed in terms of every mannerism they have and these kinds of things. So as a result, they can observe a lot better the kind of mannerisms that people have and these kinds of things. And so it's just so interesting to hear, their perspectives on certain things that you have questions about. Like, dude, what do you think about this? Like, hey, I had this interaction. Do you think that was weird? Like, whatever it is, they will observe certain things that you would never observe because it's not something that you ever have to consciously think about, but it's something that they consciously think about in to be able to disguise or to do whatever they're doing. So, you can seek out the right people too. I don't know if that's unethical or not, but my autistic friends in high school definitely helped a lot.
Yeah, exactly. This is, again, it opens up a lot of conversation topics. One of them is like surrounding yourself with a lot of different types of people is very valuable. It's one of the most valuable things. I went to an Ivy League school, so I'm surrounded by a lot of high achieving people. And it's the same, like, you'll get a lot of different perspectives, especially as I think I got a little bit more into my life, especially in the working world. I started appreciating the people who, let's say, had some kind of diagnosed autism spectrum. And I want to caution people, I don't like that word, the D at the end. I don't think it's a disorder. It's just a different type of pattern, brain pattern. So
totally. If you know enough of them, it's not a disorder.
Yeah, it's not a disorder.
Yeah.
One of the stories, again, this is just one of my funny LA stories, but there was a guy who was autistic, and I used to host a Mandarin meetup because, again, like, yes, I'm quote unquote native Mandarin fluency, but it comes with practice. It's not like English, right? Because the reason why we're all fluent in English is because we're practicing every day. But if you want to stay fluent in Mandarin and live in America, you better practice, right? So I would host a Mandarin meetup when I was in LA, and it drew some people who are on the autism spectrum. And one guy, I remember, he was such a smart guy, such a funny guy, but like, obviously certain things he was not maxed out at, right? Like, that's another way to describe it. Like, they're maxed out at certain cool things that maybe some of us aren't, but they're not maxed out at other things. So one time he had nothing to do, and he's like, "Can I just follow you?" And I was like, An average person would say no. I'm like, "Sure, follow me." And so he followed me around for 3 hours. I let him. It was fun. And like, we had some of the coolest conversations. Like, this guy's been to Japan. He's like, he works in tech. So he's like telling me about all the things that, like, we think of Japan as a very, very tech, like, forward country, but certain things that actually fall behind China and the US. And he was telling me all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Now, what was funny, the epilogue to the story was the next time at a Mandarin meetup, because I guess I established this precedent, he tried to ask if he could follow someone else. And the person's like, no, you can't follow me. So like, as a group leader, I should have like told them, hey, you can do this to me because, I just like the experiences like that, but like, don't ask other people. You can just follow them. So I take responsibility. I should have like told them, okay, like, this time was cool, but next time don't ask other people in the Mandarin meetup if you could just follow them.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how you do it, but having your diverse perspectives around you I think will always benefit you. The enclosure into a bubble is always the downfall of people. And
yeah. That's, I think, a general theme that's from the start of our talk to now, right? I think you and I really want to go between tribes, want to go between bubbles, go between silos, because I think I told you that word when I met you, but I just feel like even in America, where we're supposed to be such a diverse country that can at least find middle ground, even if we don't want to adopt each other's like views, I feel like we're getting more and more siloed in America. It's really worrying me. If we're a democratic institution, you can't have democracy with too many bubbles, too many inability to, unsilo each other.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that I've learned, I will say, in my life in general, and this is through work, this is through travel, and everywhere, is that every conflict, almost every conflict, let's not generalize and hyperbolize, but so many problems that happen, whether they're interpersonal, whether they're group problems, these kinds of things, it's always a cultural difference. Okay. So let's say a couple is having an issue, right? Like, there's still cultural differences between the couple, right? maybe one's a white guy and one's a white girl, you still have the girl versus guy culture, right? Like there's a misunderstanding in terms of like what the communication norms are between those two groups, right? Women in groups generally interact in different ways that men in groups interact with other men, right? So that's a cultural difference. Now you have this tension in this couple because the expectation from the woman is different than the expectation from the man. So the guy feels like he's culturally apt, but he's culturally apt for his culture, and she's being culturally apt for her culture, right? So if you can have that cross-cultural communication, and culture is way bigger than what anyone really thinks about usually, right? Like there's a huge cultural difference between you and I. We align on a lot of things, but the way that we were brought up, the way that we were doing things, like not even taking race out of it, which is like usually how people do the cultural differentiation, age culture, right? The fact that we've lived in different parts of the country. You mentioned you went to an Ivy League. I went to a large state school. Another cultural difference, right? And if you really look at the way that people talk to each other and the way that people have problems with each other, it's always going to be, once again, no hyperbolization, but it's almost always going to be some kind of cultural difference that the people have that they maybe don't realize that they have and that they didn't communicate aptly about prior. And, I see this when I travel. The clashes between tourists and locals. I see this in business meetings, the clashes between the higher ups and the lower downs. And then you see this in, romantic relationships, friendships. It's just like, let's take a step back. Why are we arguing? What is it that we're arguing about? And why did we get here? And usually there was just some kind of misstep in terms of like the expectation culturally. I think that's the way I look at it. And, it's a theory. So I hasn't been disproven too many times yet, but
I'll tell you one story to support what you said. One time, and she was someone that I knew in LA, but she moved to Arizona. So, I hadn't seen her for a few years because the pandemic, but she came back to LA, partly to visit me, but partly just to visit LA again. And we went to Disney World on not Disney World, Disneyland, right? The California version on a little date. And I remember she's Chinese, and at this point she had been in America for a few years. And at Disneyland, she was still cutting in front of people, not just cutting in front of anyone, she was cutting in front of little kids. And it put such a sour taste in my mouth. I I was so mad. And so that's an example of cultural. I had this bias in me that, okay, she spent a few years in America. She dropped all the stuff she built in China, but obviously a few years in America was not enough. Right. So I think I still had that standard. It was a correct standard, but then zooming out, being okay, should I have had such a high standard? Is a few years enough to assimilate to America? But, as someone who's very Americanized, it's you're almost making little 3-year-olds cry by cutting in front of them. Stop this, right? But,
yeah.
So, I always tell that story. I'm I thought I was good at handling cultural differences until that Disneyland incident. I'm I still can't think of her the same way anymore. I'm but by the end of it, at night, I told her about another woman I was interested in, just to spite her. I was so mad.
Oh my God.
Not the proudest thing I did, but I was I was just so mad. I'm stop. I had to tell her a few times, look, that kid's that you cut in front of the kid. I was can you but so yeah, cultural difference, even the last example, romantic stuff.
Yeah. It's always that from what I've seen. But that's also something that anthropology struggles with, is the question of, is there something that's objectively wrong culturally, right?
Yeah.
And there are a few answers I forget, but there's a set, one anthropological theorist made a set of answers, and it was cannibalism can be seen as objectively wrong and these kinds of things. But where do you draw the line? Is cutting in front of a kid objectively wrong? To me, that feels like an obvious yes, right? Why would you cut in line? Do you feel like you have some kind of superiority to that kid? Is that why you're cutting in front, right? So break the question down to the point where you get to the bias that's making that behavior exist. And then I think that's how you can answer the question whether or not it's objectively wrong. But then, there are different moral standards, and it's difficult to navigate.
Yeah, exactly. And the beauty of this conversation is, I think, with a lot of our peers, whether at Georgetown, at SAIS, or whatever other schools we stumble on, we're going to have a lot of great conversations like this. And this is one of the reasons I think both of us are very excited about grad school.
Yeah. Well, something I'm excited about too is, maybe I have a a view of private schools that's a little different, but I've never been to private school in my life. I've always been a public school guy, and I'm a public institution purist, as I mentioned. And so, I'm expecting to meet some people who have been to private school their entire lives, who have lived in these insular communities their entire lives, and I'm excited to hear what their perspectives are, right? And I'm likely going to disagree with a lot of what they say. And but it's exciting to know the prospect that I'm going to have some of these people that I'm going to meet, and it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. And this might reflect my bias too. So everyone watching, take this with a grain of salt. But I think especially at Georgetown, you're going to meet more of those people than at SICE. I think Georgetown, because of the tuition expense and the stuff you're going to meet more people who have been going to private school all their lives. This could be just me being biased, but I stand by that right now.
You're right. And there was this article that this kid from Harvard wrote, who was like from a low income family and these kinds of things, and was talking about like the cultural clash between the students who are at Harvard on a scholarship and the students who are at Harvard paying for it, right? Like that's a huge difference in people that you have on the same campus. They both got into an elite institution, but the path to get there was so different, right? Like that creates a lot of tension. And same thing's gonna happen at Georgetown. I mean, I got a scholarship to go to Georgetown for grad school, but what is the difference between that and a person who has their parents paying $100,000 a year for everything? What's the difference between someone who has a full scholarship plus the cover of housing and food and all those things, between that and someone who is paying for everything and who goes on weekend trips and who like has their house in Nantucket, right? Like, how do those people coexist in such a small space? That's what's so interesting about college campuses, right? It's such like a microclimate of our society as a whole. Like you have so many different people clashing in one place, which is why I love large public schools so much. There's every type of person there, every type of person. You go to like a school with 3,000 people, maybe not, but at my school, there were some of the richest people I know, some of the poorest people I know. There are some of the smartest people I know, some of the dumbest people I know, right? So you have like such a great variety of people all just condensed. So it's like society on a span of like 40 acres, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really interesting story. I mean, I noticed some of these things when I was an undergrad, but I was talking to one of the librarians at the local library I go to a lot. And her son also like very recently graduated from an Ivy League. And she was like, man, my son had no fun there because he was not from like a super, super rich family. So he's like, man, he felt the class difference there too. So this is definitely something we're talking about more because I don't think anything's changed per se. It's just we're more conscious of it now after all these years. So yeah, these conversations, I think this is a to be continued conversation because, I have a certain mentality that I think a lot of people at SICE are going to be like me, but potentially I could be wrong. Like I like everyone at SICE go be like, have mansions and stuff. And I'm the poor one again, like undergrad. But like, so like, these are talks we should definitely have more and I even want to bring in, different types of people from both Georgetown and in fact, I'm probably going to let my stat group know about this talk and I'm going to try to get, some SICE people on my channel. So, we're going to have a lot more conversations like this.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that's a good idea. But what is another thing that's interesting, just to lightly touch on it, is the type of stratification that you have as well, right? So going back to this example from this kid from Harvard who was writing this article, the part of the thesis is you only have like two extremes, right? Harvard is not a middle class school, right? You have like these wealthy people who were privileged and were able to get a great education, but you also have like the people who were, from less fortunate families, but who were able to supersede that and come out on top. And that story is good enough to get them into Harvard, right? But then you have a lot of like middle class people who realistically probably have good enough grades to get into Harvard, realistically could get through Harvard, but don't get into Harvard or don't go to Harvard because they don't make little enough money to get a scholarship, but they don't make enough money to go to Harvard. And then you're like stuck in this in between. So you have a different kind of stratification there. Whereas state schools, the aim is to have a real representation of every part of the population, right? And so, yeah, it's a lot to consider.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, and I guess I'll just very quickly draw something too. Just might as well. but it's like this, right? What you're talking about is this. So
Mhm.
there's this, and it's funny because when I went to Penn, I was one of these people. So it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to relate to either side. Yeah, I was definitely this. Yeah, that is. I gotta read this article. This article sounds
I'll send it to you.
yeah. Please send it to me.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, guys, Nico and I will have a lot of talks, maybe one every semester or something like that, because I get a feeling as we go through grad school, we're going to continue to just like analyze, examine our own biases, examine the things we've learned, because it's important, right? You don't just go to grad school to prepare yourself for the working world, which is something important, but like you could also just take like classes. You don't have to like do the whole experience of higher ed if that was your only, right? So like you're going there partly for a liberal arts purpose. You're challenging yourself. You're learning things you would have never learned. That's at least the idealist in me.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, and you'll have some people that tell you you're too much of an idealist. I hear that a lot too. You know, I have these expectations, and the truth is you can create your expectation, but you can also create the result of your expectation if you want, right? Like if that's what you want to get out of grad school, you can totally do that.
Yeah.
Like I think that's the goal too, right? For me, one of the biggest new experiences is gonna be I'm in DC. I've lived in a capital before, but Paris is like so different, right? Like so different from DC. DC is like this planned city that's really feels like a capital and feels like a capital of the world almost, not to be like an American exceptionalist, but you know, and you know, and I'm going to be in this private school that breeds people who then become political elite. Like that's going to be extremely interesting to observe. And one of the big things, one of my big goals is to not become a part of the problem.
Yeah, and it's a great thing to think about, because again, I might have told you this, but there are even some people who call it elite overproduction, right? They're saying, oh yeah, you know, like these schools are training too many of these people, and there's just not going to be enough jobs, not going to be enough like. There's a word I'm looking for that's not job. There's not going to be enough like things in this world for all these people, right? And part of me is like, okay, is this a structural problem, or is this just like people need to set their expectations and set their goals better?
Yeah. I mean, the key to happiness wherever you are is low expectations, of course. But you know, going back to the traveling thing, that's the case as well too. You shouldn't enter a place with any kind of expectation. I mean, I'm sure you know of Paris syndrome, right? Like that is the result of high expectations, bad expectations. And it's like these Japanese tourists who are like, I mean, like I ask myself when I hear about Paris syndrome, I'm like, what are you expecting? It's a city, right? People live there. It's a city. It's a beautiful city, great architecture, some world-class museums and, you know, like monuments, but ultimately it's a city, right? So like what kind of expectations do you have and what are you creating for yourself? And I was just in Suriname and Guyana, which are the Guianas in South America. And I didn't really enter with many expectations. It's hard for me not to because I study geography and I love geography. So I try to know as much as I can about a lot of places. But I still enter with a blank slate, right? And I'm like, all right, I'm not going to have any expectation. And then I always have a good time and I always learn something, which is the key to having a good time, of course. But yeah, it's like same thing when you travel, right? You cannot come in with an expectation because then you're setting yourself up for Paris syndrome.
Yeah, I'm going to use that. I've heard it, I think, when I was in high school, but obviously as the whole Europe in general just like declined in its cultural sort of like whatever prestige. Like I haven't heard that term since high school. That's so funny. But yeah, I've heard the term Paris syndrome before. Wow. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. This is awesome.
Yeah, we'll tackle this more and on and off camera for sure. But
yeah, exactly.
It feels like there's always something you can point back to consistently in life. Like not that everything's always a pattern, but you know, humans naturally are going to seek a pattern. And that's the kind of things that you want to look for, right? Because then you can see, you can understand people better, you can understand the patterns better, and then you're like, man, well, this is an example of this, right? Like, for example, if you have a lens of conflict being a cultural miscommunication, then now if you actually think about it, now you're going to identify it everywhere you go, right? Like even think about the last time maybe you had an argument with your parents, right? Like maybe as a teenager, you argued with your parents. Why? Likely there was nothing, like likely neither side was actively seeking out harm to the other, right? That's a pretty rare thing in conflict. But you know, you have an older person who wants the best for their child, and you have the child who wants to have a good time, right? So you're in different stages of life. The parent understands where the child needs to go. The child understands where they need to go today, right? And they understand what's going to make them happy today. And they don't have the like future vision, right? So that's the cultural difference between being older and younger, and then you create a clash. So, you know, I encourage you to look at that lens for a while, try to see if you can observe. And if you disagree with me, I also want to hear about what you think. So
Yeah, exactly. Guys, I think we will end it here because Nico and I can talk for hours, and he has an appointment soon. I have an appointment soon too. So, but everyone, I will put his startup in the description, and I'll have to we'll brainstorm how to title this, because you know you're very hyphenated like I am, so we got to find the best hyphens for what you are. Because at first I was like, this guy has traveled to more than 100 countries, but that doesn't encompass what we really talked about, right? We didn't really just talk about travel. So I was like, we got to find a better title for this. We'll brainstorm that together.
sounds good.
So everyone, leave your comments. Nico will be back. And then Georgetown students, Georgetown professors, and SICE, of course, because that's my home school. SICE students, SICE professors, reach out to me, because I better be getting more I just said Georgetown. I better be getting more SICE people than Georgetown people by the end of these 2 years. Okay, SICE, come on. You're my school. We got to, you know, be tribal here. But I love my Georgetown people too. Cool.
Sounds good. I'll skew the numbers for Georgetown. I'll make sure of that.
That's awesome.